I think that they wanted to create a college for women, following the desires of Catherine Macaulay. And she really wanted to help empower women and educate women so they were less vulnerable in society and had ways to take care of themselves. So I think that it was really important, especially in that time, to create a college for women just so that they had some means of self-empowerment.
There was this impulse to respond to those who were poor, sick, and uneducated. So that threefold impulse is part of the life of the Sisters of Mercy and their founding vision.
It comes from the inspiration of Mother Catherine Macaulay, who had a great concern for the plight of women in her society. So she was in Ireland. It was a place where opportunities for women were very limited, and much of that limitation came as a result of lack of education. So she saw that education was a key that would open a lot of doors.
One of the great things about Vatican II is that it really emphasized the role of the laity in the church. So sisters, being among the laity and who have committed their lives of service to the church and to the people of the world, I think had probably a sense of empowerment, maybe a little bit of liberation, in the sense that they could contribute more fully into the life of the church.
And the call was to renew religious life, to get close again to the charism of the founder. Go back to the beginnings and see who you were meant to be.
My professors, who were all priests, were very keenly attuned to everything that was happening in Rome and all of the news coming out.
So one of the things that was looked at was, we'll use the Sisters of Mercy as an example, is that the habit that Catherine took on were really the clothes of the widow of late 19th century Ireland. Simple mourning clothes that they wore. Well, now you're in the 20th century, and they're wearing all of this stuff that had accrued over time, that even Catherine didn't have as much apparel on as the sisters were wearing. And so part of the renewal was the decision to what did it mean to return to the charism of Catherine Macaulay by what you wore. And the decision was to go simpler. So habits became simpler. So they unloaded some of the accrual over time and went to the more simpler approach. That eventually led to wearing the lay clothes. So there was a renewal of the structures of how religious life understood itself, became more collaborative, more dialogic, more conversation. Obedience was something that, as opposed to waiting for the assignment from the superior, became something a sister discussed. So this was a widespread mandate from the Second Vatican Council for religious congregations to return to the original sources of why they were founded and to renew under that impulse of the original charism.
There was also a lot of turmoil. It upended things for a lot of people. As you're probably aware, a lot of women were no longer sisters within a few years after the conclusion of the council. A lot of the men, a lot of the priests who taught me in high school were no longer priests within a few years after the conclusion of the council. Why did that happen? I don't think anybody really knows. I don't think it was the intent of the council. Certainly the church fathers never expected that the innovations they brought about would result in this mass exodus. But I think it happened because all of a sudden there was a greater awareness that it didn't just have to be priests and nuns. And I think that was a huge revelation, first of all, to those priests and nuns. I can make a difference in the life of the world. I can make a difference in the life of the church. And so I think in those early years, some folks forgot the main reasons why they became religious or clergy. And they thought that they could do the work part as lay people. I don't think you can rejoice over the sisters that we have without having some regret over the sisters that we lost. Religious life will continue to be an animating and energizing and a critically necessary part of the life of the church. So I'm sure there will be sisters both in the wider church and also in the life of St. Xavier. Their role may look differently. We may go through a hiatus where we're not going to see a whole lot of sisters, but religious life is not going to disappear because it's a gift of the Holy Spirit to the church, and the Holy Spirit's not going to let that go away.
And of course here, St. Xavier, a little known fact to still far too many people, is when the council closed in 1965, in December of 65, that April of 1966, all of the major theological architects that were in Rome for the Second Vatican Council came here, in the room we're sitting in, and in the auditorium, and the library, and in every place there was, because there was a conference here called John the 23rd Symposium that they thought would be small, ended up with 3,000 people. Most of them had never been out of Europe, so it was their first visit to the United States, and they made the visit here. So that's kind of a singular piece of the St. Xavier story. And the sisters that led the momentum to invite them got in some trouble because the cardinal at that time, archbishop at that time, hadn't approved it. Most of the theologians were priests. And he was a little leery of all of this activity going on a women's college campus, not under his direct authority, and he wanted to suppress the conference. And across newspapers was this little Catholic college on the south side of Chicago run by these sisters, was in a national debate over academic freedom and how ecclesiastical authority interacts with academic freedom. And ultimately, the college won the conversation, and the archbishop said it was all a misunderstanding. It looked like highly energized, no bounds to intellectual inquiry. We could find the courage to make it work, even over against obstacles that were being presented. It was sophisticated. It was cutting edge. I think that is in the genes of this university, and I think many people that come through here for their education know it.
Well, I know it was a controversial event. I know the then Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago tried to prevent it. I know that some of the very astute and wise women who ran St. Xavier at the time managed to make it come off. And it was, I think, one of our proudest moments. When you talk about the Second Vatican Council, that's a historic moment of, monumental proportions. Well, the brightest minds who were at that council in Rome all gathered here on this campus. They all came, they hopped on the planes, and they came to St. Xavier University, on the college at the time, on the south side of Chicago. Men who have written books that people have read for the past 50 years. They gathered here, and I think that's something that will always be just a great hallmark of our life for the past 50 years. But I think the culture has changed dramatically. The workplace has changed dramatically. Men and women work together. And I think it's important for young people to get that experience of knowing one another, of learning to respect each other, of not being in any way in awe of one another, and of recognizing that they can put their gifts on the table and that their gifts will have a place and that their voice can be heard. And so I'm sure that the sisters, because of their concern for women, saw that this would be an advantage.